share our thoughts and experiences with this series, and that's why we partnered with Scope 3 Peer Group on this. And I'm joined by my colleagues Iris, Wenjuan, and Pingtian, who will be presenting and speaking about our latest guide research and examples in the steel sector. Um, but to warm us up a little bit, on the next page, you will see a quick check-in question. We would like to know on a scale of 1 to 3, how familiar are you with this procurement mechanism and chain of custody models? 1 is new to me, and 3 means very familiar. And you can put your answer in the chat. We asked this question because today we're going to focus on these two topics, and we're gonna share the example in the steel industry. Okay, I see a lot of 1 and 2, 1.5. So it seems like a lot of people is, oh, I saw 2.5 there. So relatively more familiar with this. So I think it's a mix of familiarity I see, which works well. We hope to build on what you already know. For those who are more familiar with this topic, we will cover some core concepts. And we'll introduce some practical tools and examples, hopefully can deepen your understanding on these two topics. Um, and as usual, on the next page, just a little bit housekeeping. Please feel free to drop comments or questions in the chat. We have a lot of content to cover in this 1 hour session and may not be able to get to every question, but we will try to address those common themes. So please remember to stay muted during the presentation and submit your comments and questions in advance before the Q&A. Also, as a reminder on next page, this is the session 2 of our 3-part low carbon procurement webinar series. It is built around our low carbon procurement how-to guide, which you will be able to access using the QR code on the right side of the screen. It is hosted on the Energy Transition Academy of RMI. And the goal of the series is to really help strengthen your understanding of low carbon procurement, from why we need to do it and what to buy and then how to buy. And the session 1, which took place last month, we focused on the why and what. And today we will dive into the big how, the procurement mechanisms, chain of custody models, and walk through steel examples, and show how these strategies could work in practice. And in January in 2026, we will continue the sectoral deep dive. We hope to see you there, so you can scan the QR code to register for the future session. And next page, quickly on the agenda, Iris will present on the core concept of this topic, and then we will have Wenjuan speak about the seal example. We'll have short Q&A in between. So again, type your questions in advance, and we will try to address those common themes. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand the floor to Iris.
Great. Thanks so much, Hao. Yeah, like Hao mentioned, my name is Iris. I'm going to be going over some of our content for this session. And as we mentioned before, our session today is on implementing low carbon procurement strategies. And this information is going to correlate with module 3 of our how-to guide. So we can go to the next slide. Today, we're going to walk through some practical tools and market structures that companies can actually use to procure low carbon commodities. And across today's session, we're going to look at 3 guiding questions. The first being what procurement mechanisms are available and how do they work in practice? The second is what role does the chain of custody or COC model play in ensuring credibility and impact, and um, does sector readiness look like, and what pieces of the low carbon procurement landscape are available today, um, and also kind of looking at what's in progress or what's missing across some different sectors. So our goal is to leave you with a bit of a clearer sense of the practical options available and what you can start doing today to build a procurement strategy. We can move on to the next slide. So I just want to clarify here what we mean by a procurement mechanism versus a purchase channel. These terms are often used a bit interchangeably, but they serve a bit of a different role. So, a procurement mechanism is the type of commercial agreement or how the buyer and supplier structure a deal. It shapes who carries the risk, how the terms are set, and how much influence the buyer has on production decisions. These mechanisms are more relevant when the buyer wants to support new low carbon production, signal demand, or lock in a stable supply. A purchase channel, on the other hand, refers to the pathway through which the buyer accesses the product. For example, through a buyer's alliance or a market intermediary, and especially in cases where the buyer isn't transacting directly with a supplier. So this Venn diagram shows how mechanisms and channels intersect. The procurement mechanisms on the left let buyers set commercial terms, share risk, and influence production. The channels are on the right here, and they include things like group purchase, buyers alliances, or green market makers. Um, and they allow for uh, demand to be aggregated to reduce transaction costs and create pathways for buyers who might not have that direct supplier relationship. And right in the middle here is what they share in common. So mechanisms and channels together, they both enable access to low carbon products, mitigate risk, and support market development. So understanding these categories helps organizations pick the right tools for them depending on their size or their risk appetite and the maturity of the sectors that they're buying from. We can go to the next slide. So here are some of the major procurement mechanisms and purchase channels that we can take a look at. So we'll start with the procurement mechanisms. A small batch condition contract. These are limited quantity agreements, and they allow buyers to basically test a new material or supplier before they scale up. And they are helpful at validating those performance requirements before a company locks into buying a larger quantity. They help mitigate risk by keeping those volumes smaller and making them ideal for buyers who want some more options or who want flexible timelines. The second here, these are offtake agreements or long-term purchase commitments, and they give suppliers more certainty that they need to invest in new technologies by guaranteeing future purchases at a predetermined price. So buyers with stable demand often use this approach to secure supply and lock in that price predictability. And then we have our direct investment, which is the most hands-on model in a sense, because the buyer will allocate capital into a supplier's operation. So this can be anything from like a new DRI module or direct reduced iron module in steel or renewable hydrogen production. These things typically are used when that supply security is really important or when the buyer wants more early access to these advanced technologies. And then we have the closed loop offtake. This is a model that basically cycles materials back into the buyer's own supply chain. So, for example, scrap recovery back into steel production. This minimizes the volatility and supports circularity goals, and it makes it suitable for those vertically integrated buyers. So moving on to the purchase channels here, we have these group purchases or buyers alliances. These bring multiple buyers together so that they can negotiate collectively with suppliers, and this helps those smaller buyers who might lack individual leverage get better pricing or secure supply, and it helps share that risk among all the buyers. The green market makers, these are intermediaries who they buy and bundle and sell those green commodities together, and they're particularly useful for those newer markets where supply and demand are still a bit fragmented, and they help stabilize pricing and reduce the need for buyers to manage those direct supplier relationships. So altogether, these mechanisms offer something for every buyer, whether you want to support those early stage technologies or aggregate demand or kind of divide up that price risk. Um, these are some avenues you can take. And this is a resource that is available in the how-to guide as well. So it can be referenced through our guide. We can move on to the next slide. Yes. So procurement mechanisms, those tell us about how the commercial arrangement works, but the chain of custody model tells us how those environmental attributes flow through the system. So, chain of custody is fundamental for credible reporting and claims. It determines how a buyer can associate those low carbon attributes with the materials they procure. So, in this slide, we map three main chain of custody options using low carbon steel as an example. These options range from strong physical association to fully decoupled models. So physical separation is the strongest link here as low carbon inputs and outputs are fully segregated. For example, a steel mill that operates a dedicated hydrogen DRI and sells its output as a green steel product. So the low carbon attribute is directly built into that product that they're selling. And this is ideal for buyers when their demand or when they demand that physical verification or when those new production lines make segregation feasible. Mass balance has more of an intermediate association. So as low carbon and conventional inputs are mixed, and these attributes are allocated to outputs based on a defined rule. So, for example, a steel mill that blends low carbon iron, scrap, and conventional inputs into an electric arc furnace. So products here are labeled green based on allocation, but not necessarily based on the physical proportion. And this often is the only practical option when physical separation isn't necessarily feasible, but it requires some strict rules to avoid over allocation or double counting. Now, the last option here is book and claim. Uh, this has the weakest physical link, but it has the strongest flexibility. So the physical product flows independently from the environmental attributes. So, in this case, if a steel mill sells conventional steels but issues certificates for the low carbon share of the production, so an end user will buy those certificates and retire them to claim those scope 3 reductions. Um, Book and claim is used often in more complex supply chains where the buyers can't necessarily trace those physical flows or they can't directly procure from those low carbon suppliers. So each model plays a bit of a different role, and it's common for sectors to end up with a combination of different chain of custody mechanisms as well. We can move to the next slide here, which will be the last slide of our content overview for today. So that on this slide, we zoom out and look a bit across sectors, and we've mapped out some key building blocks here of a functioning low carbon procurement ecosystem. So on the left here, you'll see sustainability insurance or assurance, procurement model and disclosure, and buyer support as some of those essential elements. And across the top, you'll see a few different sectors from steel, aluminum, cement, chemicals, aviation, shipping, trucking, and low leakage fossil gas. And the color coding here shows which where each element is. So in some sectors, the full set of pieces is now in place. You have clear accounting guidance, established product standards, operational chain of custody systems, and at least one functioning market or registry. And in those sectors, the buyers can move from those initial pilots and testing out those systems to scaling that procurement with relatively high confidence. Um, in other sectors, some of these elements are in place, but some of them aren't. And maybe the accounting rules and product standards are available, but the disclosure platform is still in development, or book and claim is only in a pilot phase. Um, there are still a few gaps in some of these sectors where buyers might need to work a bit more directly with suppliers or standard setters to shape what comes next. So, a couple patterns to point out. Chain of custody systems are becoming more standard. So, these things aren't really experimental anymore. They're being embedded into sector standards and registries. Buyers' alliances are really powerful tools here. We see these active alliances in various sectors, and they help aggregate demand to send those clear signals to suppliers and buyers. And sector readiness is a bit of a spectrum. So some sectors are essentially procurement ready now, while others are still assembling a few missing pieces, but we see very few sectors that are at absolutely zero. So there's something that buyers can do to start engaging, whether that's joining an alliance or running a small pilot or aligning with those internal requirements for emerging standards. So as you look at your own portfolio of materials, this map can help you identify where your sector is and what the best point of intervention is for you. So that is our content overview for now. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over. I think I'm turning this over to Ping for our discussion questions and our Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much, Iris, for the overview. Hi, everyone. My name is Pingtian Chen. I'm a senior associate at RMI's Energy Transition Academy, and I'm gonna facilitate the Q&A today. We're now going to shift to our first Q&A. Please continue sharing your questions in the chat, and I'm seeing some Q&A in the chat already. And thank you to those who've already started. How is helping group them so we can get to the ones that are coming up more frequently? Please continue to share your questions in the chat. I'm seeing one. The first question is, how does segregated compare to identity preserved? And should we be aiming for IP or segregated enough? And thank you, Wenjuan, for answering the question. Yeah, feel free to share more questions in the chat.
Yeah, I feel like while waiting for more questions to come in, we can focus more on the peer sharing. There are some quick discussion questions on the screen. We would love to know what the content that we have just covered on the procurement mechanisms and chain custody models. Have you ever tried those things, especially who voted 2.5? I would think you might have experiences and practices to share. Any lessons learned so far would be really helpful for the peer group.
We didn't have any threes, did we? Only 2.5s. No one likes to pretend they're an expert. Feel free to put your hand up as well. You can put your hand up if you've got any experiences of working on that.
Yeah. Feel free to raise your hand and share your experience.
Jens has already spotted that TFS is missing from the sector
Yeah.
landscapes line. I thought he'd be very on that. Well done, Jens.
Yeah, I thought we have included that. I'm not sure why. I mean, definitely in the how-to guide. But thanks for spotting that. We'll definitely add that as the resources.
Yeah.
I'm seeing more questions coming.
Guys, if you want to ask your questions as well as type them, please do. Jeremy, do you want to ask your question? Maybe just clarify it. Don't have to, of course.
Hi, yeah, Jeremy Kramer. I'm up in Canada, and I'm a consultant in the infrastructure sector, the water sector specifically. And dealing with municipalities, the problem we always encounter is if there's a limited supplier market for any given product, and low carbon products are particularly in this category. For example, we may have only one supplier who might have a low carbon product or have an EPD that identifies even their carbon information. And so I'm just wondering if the team here can chat through the implications for public sector procurement. How would the information presented be useful or differ for public sector in that case where we really it's nearly impossible to work with a single supplier, with the exception of what we would say we do a pilot test. We can pilot test with one supplier, but to do long-term sole source contracting is quite difficult. So it's just more of an open-ended question.
Thank you for sharing that, Jeremy.
Yeah, apparently I works a lot on the private sector, but we do have experts, which is who is this guest speaker who works a lot on the public sector procurement, the real responsible. Rose, I don't want to put you on the spot to answer this question, but I'm curious to see if you have any. Yeah,
Yeah, we have this
insights to
discussion a
share.
lot, and actually, I just want to, if it's okay with you, I just share a screen, which is not the most beautiful chart we ever made, but it shows that we thought about this. I hope that's the right. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm like a newbie in Zoom, and this is no good. Anyway, yeah, that we had this problem a lot, the short answer that we came to for public procurers. So Responsible has the full rail supply chain from operators to kind of steel and copper and aluminium, so metal producers, and the operators, the rail companies like Deutsche Bahn, they're all public procurers, so they're all limited here. And we put together this. I can show you here at the bottom, like a really quick. Oh gosh, no, I can't really show. A really quick question. I'm sorry, I can't zoom in. So, this kind of question here, this matrix, which pretty much asks the question with a public procurement lens. So is there anything you can do about it? Do you have options at a purchasing level? Yes, I have more than one supplier. You can engage with the market. No, you've got a monopoly. This is then on a longer road. You have to work together. Are there any low carbon alternatives available? Yes, engage with the market. No, work together. This is a really simplistic view of this, but it pretty much says you're in then for a longer program here, where you have to work with your suppliers, or you have to do some supplier market engagement rather than supplier engagement, market engagement, to develop the market and understand how you can in the future develop your supply base. But I'll share this whole document with everyone afterwards.
Thank you so much. This is super helpful, Rose. We'll definitely share this material along with the webinar slides. And hope that helps your question, Jeremy. Yes, Nancy, and then we will address the few questions in the chat before we move on. Thanks so much, Rose.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm just on that public procurement. As a bit of a background, I was as part of the procurement team at the General Services Administration in the United States, where it was my responsibility. And granted, this was before the current administration, and in fact, has been now, I would say, about 8 years ago. But the problem that was raised is very real. So I was the director for the federal supply chain and actually trying to leverage the purchasing power of the US to start putting in some criteria for preferences to actually put the spend might against these newer, greener products. But there's no simple way around it. I think what was just raised is exactly a good approach. If you put out the bid and if we couldn't get at least 3 responses to choose, it was not a competitive bid and we couldn't award. So probably the same comparable challenges you see with sole sourcing. What what there is, of course, is the engagement in the sector, so working actually with the market. But one of the innovative things that we found is to try to use our mentoring program at that time and actually start aligning some of these startups, because you mentioned pilots, with potentially an existing supplier, and through that mentoring program, allowing an opportunity for more of the entrants to come to market and maybe bid on that due to the partnership. So it may not just be that one company, but maybe another one who was thinking about it but didn't have the support. So I would just say that the mentoring program that you might have between small startups and existing suppliers might be something also worth exploring.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nancy, for sharing that. We have a few more questions in the chat from Francisco, from Tim, from Joe, from Emma. I don't know if RMI team want to select some of those and address some of the questions before we move on. Yeah.
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
bundle those questions. Yeah, and Weijue, please go ahead.
yeah, I was just about to say that for the questions around SBTI and GHG, whether they would allow the use of those commodity certificates in their guidance. I mean, like we don't have a certain answer for that, but for SBTI, at least in their very recent draft on the corporate net zero guidance, net zero standard, it does show a positive sign for allowing the use of commodity EACs to reduce their emissions to help companies reach their climate goal, as long as there are certain level of physical associations that can be achieved, which basically means that you cannot, for example, use a steel EACs to reduce your emissions from a kind of cement and concrete in a building. That's kind of the physical association that they're referring to. And for GHGP, I think it's pretty unclear for now. They have this like market mechanism working group that is ongoing, but in terms of like what will be allowed or not, it's not clear, but possibly just based on what they have released as a draft for scope 2, probably they're going to have like more stricter rules on additionality. So like how would you prove there is something additional and new attached to the specific certificates? And there might also be some proposals around like separate reporting of those like physical based calculations and then those like virtual based calculation representing this like location based and market based approach for scope 2. All of those are like our observation of the market, but generally we're seeing a positive sign at least from SBTI. And then for Joe's questions on RMI's partnership with GMA and develop book and claim models for chemicals. So we're not the team that has been specifically working on this, but I can share a little bit of background. So at RMI, we have started some efforts on steel where we created this like buyer's purchasing platform. And on top of that, we are at a stage of developing the steel book and claim mechanism. And then we are replicating this model to other sectors. And then chemicals is one of them. So with this model, we are working together with GMA to also, trying to develop these book and claim models where it would involve some, a list of the working groups that include industry expertise and also standard setters and sectoral experts as well as part of the working group to co-develop the guidance as what we did for other sectors. But in terms of like what stage of that work, I think it's at the pretty earliest stage. And we have also been working with GMA to develop a book and claim model for the cement and concrete sector as well. So more to come. And if you're interested, please reach out to us. We can link you to the specific people working on that project so you can have more information on that. I think that's kind of all the questions. I believe the last questions from Emma has been addressed maybe by Hal, but I don't know if Hal, you want to share a little bit more on that.
No, I think that's a very great segue because she's wanted to see some specific design principles of book and claim system. Um, and in your presentation, we're gonna share some examples.
Yeah.
So why not we move on?
Yeah, thank you so much, Wenjuan, for addressing all the questions. I'll just head back to you, Wenjuan, for the steel case example.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll share my screen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So as I briefly mentioned before, at RMI, we have done really a lot of work on the like how to leverage demand to drive upstream decarbonization and also increase the supply pool of those low carbon materials, especially in the steel sector. So that's why we picked this particular sector and also want to share some of the green procurement examples and insights on what to buy, how to buy, and what are the available market mechanisms that can be helpful for the purchase. So this list of the resources or like those examples are not exhaustive and we're not intended to be exhaustive, but more focus on the options that are my most familiar with and facilitated. If we can move to the next slide to just provide you a little bit more background on what we have been doing and why we or like how we leverage those momentum in steel sector. We say this specific sector represent a promising opportunity because we have, started from companies that have already made those climate commitments, for example, the SBTi goals, and also then build on that, we help them translate those specific climate commitments into purchasing commitments. For example, those like first mover coalitions commitment, like I'm going to buy this amount of materials, green materials by 2030, like something like that. And then to achieve their commitments, companies usually find ways to buy those green materials. And then we observed that some of the companies, they undertake those like bilateral agreements with steel suppliers. For example, they may shop around what are the existing lower emissions offerings, or in some more advanced cases, they start to consider the longer term offtake from a future near zero facility that would be able to provide supply for a list of the years. But in most often cases, what we observed was that the volume from an individual buyer usually is not enough. It is not enough to allow the technology shift for a whole asset. That's we at RMI, we created this sustainable steel buyers platform where it is a collaborative procurement platform to facilitate a group of interested buyers to collectively issue the RFI and RFP for buying those like new near zero steel. And the role that RMI play is to assess whether those specific RFP make sense, what are some of the climate performance and recommendations on, for example, emissions threshold that we can build into those RFI and RFP. And build on this success, we are currently scaling the demand by introducing book and claim mechanism, where we see it is particularly helpful to unlock a broader demand pool to accelerate investment in more allied asset-level technology shift, because with book and claim, the buyers would not need to, physically offtake those materials. Although physical offtake is very important and that is the best, but in most cases, it is not possible. So with book and claim, it would be able to unlock a much broader demand pool on that. In the next slide, we want to show a little bit about, how to assess those existing low carbon product offerings. For most of the companies, the starting point is actually exploring like what are the low carbon sourcing options. And then by reviewing those available products, that can include what exists today and what is expected to enter the market soon. However, this review often can be pretty challenging because product offerings are usually not directly comparable. And the challenge can be caused by the different products, their emissions can be measured in inconsistent system boundaries. They use different allocation method. There are different, chain of custody method back on the back. They have different data quality or availability or other methodology choices that can make it very difficult for buyers to have a apple-to-apple comparison. And those inconsistency usually delay the progress and prevent buyers from moving to the next step. And then for the more advanced choices, those options, they can face similar barriers, but more on the credibility of those claimed climate performance, like are they able to achieve those climate performance in several years later? How about the maturity and feasibility of those underlying technologies? Or would this going to be, be a success, or would there be any delay in the process and then increase the cost a lot, especially for those like early stage solutions? So to support a more informed decision making, on the right side, we have summarized the most common and critical considerations across both existing and emerging product offerings. Of course, we cannot help companies to make decisions, but what we do is to help buyers evaluate those options from a more comprehensive lens, and then so that they can be more confidently shape their low carbon purchasing strategies. In the next slide, for here, what we observed was that even with a pretty solid understanding of those product offerings, buyers can still face pretty big barriers in buying those materials. For example, and also I mentioned before, like buying physical green steel is pretty difficult. So especially if we're talking about steel, it can be the example of in like end use sectors like construction, where the value chain is pretty long and fragmented and complex. So buying physical material like physical green steel from an end buyer who, for example, own an office building is pretty unrealistic. In this case, we believe, book and claim mechanism might make sense. So this mechanism would be able to allow the environmental attribute of low carbon products to be separated from the physical product and then transferred to the buyers who cannot access those green materials directly. And by doing so, it expands the participation and also accelerate demand signals for low carbon production. However, and as some of the peers mentioned in chat, it is very important to maintain credibility. So the system must be built on very carefully designed rules so that it would be able to ensure validity, integrity, and also the prevention of double counting across the value chain. And those are some of the common challenge or critiques by the industry on book and claim. In the next slide, we show a pretty simplified diagram in terms of how book and claim works for steel. Usually for 1 unit of book and claim, there can be a physical value chain and a virtual value chain. For the physical value chain, it represents like when this green steel got produced by either the iron or steel producer, its environmental attributes got stripped off. And then this physical material, even that is a green steel or green iron, it will be sold to the physical buyer as conventional or like a bronze steel. And then the environmental attributes that got stripped off from the physical product, it can be sold directly to the EAC buyer. And this EAC buyer can be at either stage of the value chain. And by doing so, the iron and steel suppliers, for those like upstream suppliers, they would be able to directly link to the end customers who usually have a higher level of willingness to pay. And they would be able to unlock more financing opportunities for deep decarbonization projects. And for those indirect buyers who cannot access those green materials physically, they would be able to buy the certificates to reduce their emissions. And also they can partner with their value chain members for cost sharing as well if coal claim can be allowed by the mechanism. And then in the next slide, like with this rough understanding of how book and claim work, we also show one use case example in terms of like how a steel EAC can be buy and can be bought and co-claimed with value chain partner for a specific case. In this example, we show that as, for example, a technology firm, they want to decarbonize the steel used in their office building. They can work with their builder or whoever else in the construction supply chain and think about to buy EACs from the steel producer. They just go to the registry, they find the EACs that meet all of their environmental or like climate requirement, and then they just buy that as a primary claimant, and they can co-claim that with their builder. And all of those information will need to be specifically tracked in the registry. And by doing so, the technology firm would be able to, cost share with the builder so that, both of them would be able to reduce their emissions. And of course, as I mentioned before, the system guardrails are pretty important to ensure high integrity product registration and credible claims. And that is what we are currently doing at RMI. In the next slides, we have started a series of steel book and claim working groups from May this year. And we organize the topics around some of the key elements when designing a book and claim mechanism that include, how to select a functional unit, what emission threshold makes sense, how to select emission baselines that would represent the product that has been displaced by the green material. What are the additionality requirements in terms of, regulatory additionality, financial additionality, and some of the common practice additionality. And then how to allocate emissions, especially if the green iron is being used for steel production, how to allocate the green iron inputs to the steel outputs to maintain the physical reality, but also encourage the cost cover for steel producers. And on the buyer's claim and reporting side, we're also discussing the rules for in terms of how to retire those claims, what co-claiming going to be allowed, how to transfer, what kind of claims that the buyers would be able to make, et cetera, et cetera. And we have those like specific calculation examples to just to like a workshop if there are any edge case that we need to consider. If you're interested, please reach out to us. We're currently at the drafting process, and we are looking to start the public consultation in Q2 next year. And we believe many of those like lessons learned would be able to apply to a broader set of sectors that would include not only steel, but also other sectors like maybe copper or something else. And we are exploring that opportunities as well. I will stop it here. I know we only have like 30 minutes left, so I will toss it back to Hal to see what else that we want to cover, and also if address any questions that may arise in chat.
Thanks so much, Wenjuan. This is super informative, and I hope our work experiences can help deepen your understanding how this actually works. I've been trying to address the questions in the chat, but the team, please monitor as the new questions come up. We do have two guest speakers. We don't want this to be just RMI sharing our experiences of procurement and mechanisms. We have Rose from the Real Responsible and Jewel from the Siemens Gamesa. And they have a lot of the actual practices in the real world of the steel procurement. So I would like them to share some informal comments and reflections on their practices. And maybe Rose, you go first.
More than happy to. So the report that I shared earlier, I feel a little bit bad because they're not really my best practices to share. So as Rail Responsible, we gathered other people's best practices. So I really have to give a shout out to the actual people actually best practicing out there, who were kind enough to share their best practices with us. But what we did was collect a series of best practices looking in the rail sector, particularly looking at what we identified as key materials. So the particular focus was steel and concrete. And the idea was to understand in the real world, how is this working and how companies are succeeding here, but also why are others not, and what we can do to help them. And that we cover this in the report, which I'll share. But one, I think, interesting best practice that I would like to share is that of SNCF Réseau, the French rail infrastructure manager, who signed a multi-year agreement with Saarstahl. So it was a contract worth over $1 billion to supply low carbon steel rails made via EAF. And I think what was really interesting about this is the program that SNCF has been rolling out over many, many years. So their previous contract cycle would, including only a small percentage of green steel, but they gave a kind of real heads up to their suppliers that in the next contract cycle, so within 5 to 6 years, the next contract cycle, they would be looking at only green steel contracts. So they gave time for people to prepare, some time for people to prepare. And they were aware that that would limit their supply base, but they also gave enough time for their other suppliers to make up the shortfall. And what was also really interesting is that we see SNCF Réseau and the French as being a best practice because they have managed to do this where others have failed. And one of the interesting reasons was green financing from the government, which required low carbon procurement, which enabled them to go around some of the public procurement hurdles that other companies faced. They did this excellent market signaling, and then they had these they have this mechanism that says that all tenders over a certain value have to trigger a discussion between rail and the rail department and the sustainable procurement department. So any tender going out into the world over a certain value, which relates to a certain impact, they have to have at least a discussion. And this comes to this point that Nancy mentioned earlier and was one of the questions: what do you do when you don't have enough suppliers? That at least you have this input where you can have this discussion and you can look together with your sustainability department or your sustainable procurement department. What does this mean, and where could I find other suppliers? And this has developed their knowledge of the market, it's developed their supply base, it's allowed them to have better conversations over time and make decision making that allows them to procure green steel where others are not really managing it. And I also really liked from that best practice that they've tied the employee compensation system to sustainability. Since the company is a profit sharing company, so all of the employees will have a KPI that's tied to sustainable procurement, which means that they are suddenly more interested across the board than they might have been before. But like I say, a lot of we have a series of best practices at the back of the report, and I'm happy to share it. So otherwise, I think I'd just say any questions.
Thanks so much, Rose. Definitely, we will share this report. I'm based in France. I didn't know this practice from SNCF, so super interesting and intriguing. And I feel like it's so interesting that the topic always tied back to like also like the internal collaboration of a company or organization to be able to better position this low carbon procurement, which we covered in the previous session as well. So thank you so much for sharing. And now over to Jules.
Oh God, my voice. I just recovered from COVID, so thanks. So Maybe quickly introducing, I'm working in Siemens Gamesa and we are an OEM for wind turbines. And steel is one of really the main materials we use for the wind turbine. The tower alone is like 1,000 tons of steel we use in there, plus the nacelle. So each and every turbine really is dependent on that steel. And for us really to drive this sustainable energy transition, obviously we need to drive the green steel transition. This is clear for us. But obviously that leads us to the problem that the steel makers are really stuck in this investment trap, right? So the question is, should steel makers really invest now in those green technologies, or and will those off-takers then also be willing to pay this premium price that today unfortunately exists? And then also, or should they already kind of try and invest in those greener or in the trend, or should they continue being with this traditional infrastructure? But in the end, what we think the greener steel, at least from our perspective, will really become the standard. So what we believe is that they will end up with those stranded assets. So for us, kind of the question is, because we need that greener steel, but how can we really accelerate the green steel transition? So for us, we say that clear standards. So for example, on the thresholds, what even is green or greener steel? And by the way, we are always using the claim of greener steel because we don't have a net zero steel or whatever available that we are selling to the market. So that's really something that is really required. We have set it on our own currently, but that's really something where we believe that this will also definitely drive the decarbonization. And then obviously the carbon pricing mechanisms such as ETS and CBAM will definitely have an impact on the greener steel transition, we believe. But and really help also the solutions to become competitive, we think. But we also think that this is not yet enough. What we actually need is this like pull effect, so the demand effect that we actually need. So we actually need to think, we believe, greener transition from end to end. So we need to carry like the additional costs for those investments, for those green steel transitions along the value chain. It's not going to be one value chain partner that is just going to bear the entire risk with it. That's just not going to work out. So we need to think all of this end to end, from the supplier to the end customer in reality. So this only will then also enable the competition. So we need to have the several suppliers in the market that we are also right now developing. To be able to even provide us with that, because with that competition, with this carbon pricing mechanism, with the pull effect that we actually needed also going forward, I think this is really what will hopefully transform the market. And this is also why that's at least something that is really specific, I would say, to the wind industry. But we really welcome the introduction of non-price criteria into our industry. So greener steel requirements are actually becoming a competitive factors to win tenders, to win those wind farms in the end. So kind of to drive that change, we always say what we actually need is a business case. No one will just do it out of pure interest in the green transition, I think, but everyone needs that business case for it. So whatever we always do is we think end to end. We never just say, okay, we are just going to purchase this and hope our customer will pay for it. But we actually go into this end-to-end discussion, and this is making it successful. So for us, right now we are installing the very first project with greener steel towers in Denmark. It's 4, and there we have sold more than 30 greener towers to RWE, our customer. And I think this really shows. I mean, those towers, they come with a higher price right now, but still, we made it. Still, there was a business case for it, and still we were able to kind of win this tender together with our customer. So I think, yes, there are barriers. Yes, it will be tricky, or it is tricky, but it is still somehow feasible if you engage all of the actors along the value chain.
Thank you so much, Drew. This is so fascinating to see that this is actually happening right now. And thank you for
Yeah.
sending the demand signal and create that value chain collaboration from upstream to downstream. If you have any materials that you can share, like case studies that you can share on this, I think it will be super helpful. We can attach it with the presentation
Yes, let
today
me
with the
see.
group.
We definitely have something
Yeah,
prepared. I mean, we
perfect.
like to talk about it as well. So we'll
Yes,
share some.
and thanks, Ollie, for sending this podcast, Jules, podcast.
Yeah, Maximilian was a
And
great guest, Jewel, on the podcast recently, and
Yes,
well, Oliver Bischoff, your CPO, is also wonderful as well. I've met him many times. But keep up the great work. You're both, in fact, both of you, both in the rail industry and the wind turbine industry, doing great stuff. Well done.
thanks. Thank you both so much today. Well, please don't hesitate to contact the Scope 3 peer group and RMI team if you have any specific questions around what has been covered today. We're going to share materials, but we also want to see you in January. So please do register the webinar in January. We'll continue more sectoral deep dive. Based on the group's interest. And also we have a wide range of resources and knowledge products that you will be able to access through that QR code as well. And just want to say happy holiday in advance, everyone. Thanks for your support. It has been really a great journey for us to learn from all of you as well. Thank you. Have a nice
Brilliant, Mike.
rest of the day.
Thanks, RMI team. You've been brilliant. Thank you so much for helping and supporting on this. And it's in everyone's diaries for January already. So we'll see you then. We'll see you on the other side. Eat, drink, and be merry in between. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye bye.